way back in 2015, I made a video about Sesame Street. I love Sesame Street. I grew up with Sesame Street, as did the vast majority of kids in the United States today. When it debuted, it was actually only accessible to about 2/3 of American households, just due to what type of, how strong the signal was for each of those households. And in a study published just this past February, researchers found that the children who had access to Sesame Street just based on their TV signal were 1.5% to 2% more likely to be learning at their appropriate grade level compared to the kids who did not have access to Sesame Street. That's a small difference, perhaps, but considering that it's a free-to-watch program that is now watched by more than 95% of all preschoolers, it's actually a pretty big benefit to society overall. So the research tells us that Sesame Street is extremely popular and able to have a noticeable impact on the lives and learning of our children. We also know that this amazing, popular, impactful program is left to the whim of government funding. And of course, viewers like you, because it airs on public television. That can be tricky territory here in the United States, which is why back in 2015, the video I was doing on Sesame Street was one in which I was supporting their decision to partner with HBO. HBO would pay them to get new episodes, and then Sesame Street could air those episodes on PBS 9 months later. I thought that that was great because it's not like Sesame Street is covering breaking news. So kids would still be learning the alphabet and whatnot at the usual pace while Sesame Street would get extra income. I still feel like that's a pretty good trade. However, I do wonder if there wasn't just the slightest hint of the beginning of a slippery slope there that I may have missed. Because this week I learned that Sesame Street has partnered with another organization, Autism Speaks, in order to promote that organization's screenings. Let it be known that Autism Speaks is a despicable organization that has done so much awful shit in its short history that no one should be supporting them in the slightest. This is a big problem. Back in 2017, Sesame Street introduced their first ever autistic Muppet named Julia, which they used as a great opportunity to model how neurotypical children might be able to understand, interact with, and befriend autistic children without demanding that autistic children hide who they are or change who they are fundamentally. As the Autistic Self-Advocacy Network points out in their letter announcing that they're no longer going to partner with Sesame Street over this, Autism Speaks is now using that character, Julia, to promote the opposite of what it's designed for. Julia is promoting Autism Speaks' 100-day kit for parents of a newly diagnosed autistic child, in which parents are taught to go through, for instance, the 5 stages of grief as though their child has just died in order to come to terms with their diagnosis. The 5 stages of grief aren't even really a psychologically valid tool for dealing with death, let alone an autism diagnosis. But regardless, should an advocacy organization be treating autism the same way one would treat a death sentence? The kit also encourages parents to put their kids on an autism diet, which is a fun bit of pseudoscience that pretends you can fix autism by removing all of the joy from food, like gluten. There's no evidence that this works, but that doesn't stop Autism Speaks from pretending that it's real science. That's not the least of what's problematic about Autism Speaks, though. At its founding in 2005, the organization was made up entirely of neurotypical people who focused on things like ending vaccination and spreading the regularly debunked myth that vaccines cause autism. After years of funding studies trying and failing to find a link between vaccines and autism, prominent members of the organization resigned, and Autism Speaks finally stopped banging on about it so much. There's a lot more you can learn over on Rational Wiki, like how they spread lies like 80% of parents of autistic children get divorced, and how they once partnered with a white supremacist group called Soldiers of Odin. Oh, and how they once tried to sue a 14-year-old autistic girl who made a parody website called NT Speaks, Neurotypical Speaks, to draw attention to the fact that at the time there were no autistic people speaking for Autism Speaks. The Autistic Self-Advocacy Network reports that they worked hard to convince Sesame Street that partnering with Autism Speaks was harmful to people with autism, but it was all to no avail. According to ASAN, our contacts at Sesame Street acknowledged that the Autism Speaks resources were harmful and portrayed autistic children in a negative light, yet they were unwilling to reverse course in their plans to promote them. I can only think of one reason for that to happen, and that reason is money. Was the HBO deal the beginning of the end for Sesame Street, an institution that has persisted for 50 years, relatively untouched by the dangers of capitalism? Whatever the cause, I'm overwhelmingly sad about it all. Big Bird, Oscar, Grover, Super Grover. The Muppets that I grew up with are now complicit in creating a world that is actively harmful to kids with autism. I can't support it, and I hope more people speak out. And it gets to the point, I hope, where Sesame Street wakes up and fixes this and actually does right by people with autism.